The wind whispered down the slopes of Crescent Pines like a voice from another world, cold, quiet, and foreboding. It was the kind of night where time felt frozen, and the stars above flickered like distant warnings no one could quite understand. Nestled against the base of the Rockies, the small mountain town lay draped in darkness and frost. Wooden cabins lined the hills like silent sentinels, steep driveways slick with lingering ice, and shadows stretched long across the cracked sidewalks under flickering street lamps. Most of the town was asleep. It was 3:22 a.m. The roads were empty, the air brittle. But two figures were awake. One man, one dog. Officer Jake Morgan leaned back in the driver's seat of his patrol cruiser, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes trained ahead. At 29, Jake wore the weight of experience in the curve of his shoulders, his lean build held together by quiet discipline. His brown hair was tucked under his Navy patrol cap, and his uniform was neat, sharp, clean, but not untouched. Dust and time had worked their way into the seams like they always did in small towns. Behind his stillness, behind the focused gaze, was something more. Loss. It clung to him like smoke. A year earlier, he had stood helpless in Utah during a rescue operation gone wrong, watched his former canine partner Bear disappear into wildfire flames in one final act of service. The guilt had stayed. It made Jake quieter, slower to trust, more protective than before. Some wounds didn't bleed. They echoed. Tonight, riding in the cruiser with him was Atlas, 4 years old, a German shepherd with a thick sable coat and piercing golden eyes, trained, obedient, one of the best from the state's Canine Academy. But to Jake he was not Bear. Not yet. They moved slowly down Evergreen Ridge Drive, tires crunching lightly over bits of gravel and frost. The cruiser's headlights painted the dark with pale yellow light. Then, without warning, Atlas let out a low rumbling growl from the back seat. His ears shot up, his body tensed. Something had changed. Jake glanced at the rearview mirror. "You see something?" he muttered. Atlas barked, short, sharp, urgent. Another bark followed, louder. Jake's heart rate jumped. He eased the car to the side of the road, parking near a sloped lot. There, nestled beneath two looming pine trees, stood a wooden cabin. It wasn't abandoned. Porch lights glowed softly. A baby swing hung gently from a beam above the front steps, swaying ever so slightly in the wind. The gravel crunched under Jake's boots as he stepped out, cold, biting at his skin. Atlas leapt from the cruiser, posture stiff, alert. Inside that cabin, Lena Carter stood barefoot in a fuzzy grey robe, gently bouncing her infant son in her arms. At 27, Lena wore the exhaustion of someone who had tried to rebuild a life with nothing but splinters. Her once bright eyes were dulled by long nights and courtroom battles. The divorce had drained her, but the move to Crescent Pines had been a decision made for peace. For Noah, now 2 months old, wrapped in a soft blue blanket nestled to her chest. She had once been a kindergarten teacher, full of cheer and patience, someone who spoke in gentle tones and left notes of encouragement tucked into children's lunchboxes. Now her voice rarely rose above a whisper, but the kindness remained, buried under layers of hurt. On this night, she was pacing slowly near the front window, trying to calm Noah's restlessness. The wind outside howled, and something in it made her skin prickle. Then, a bark, close, loud. She froze. A knock came seconds later. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she approached the door, pulling it open cautiously. There, under the porch light, stood a police officer with calm eyes and a large German shepherd at his side. "Ma'am, sorry to startle you," Jake said, raising one hand in peace. "But my dog picked something up. Just want to check everything's okay." I think so," Lena replied hesitantly. Noah shifted in her arms, letting out a soft, sleepy whimper. Then, before anyone could say another word, Atlas lunged. Not with aggression, but with purpose. His jaws closed gently on the sleeve of Lena's robe and pulled. Startled, she gasped and clutched Noah tighter. "Hey! Atlas! Heel!" Jake snapped, but Atlas didn't let go. He whined and tugged again, more insistently, backing toward the driveway. His body language was clear, urgent, desperate. "I don't understand." Lena's voice trembled, but her feet moved instinctively, drawn forward by the force of Atlas's pull. And then it happened. The sound wasn't a crash. It wasn't even a roar. It was older than that, an ancient groan, as if the mountain itself had exhaled a warning too late. The ground behind them shifted. Trees groaned and snapped. In the blink of an eye, the cabin began to tremble. Then it collapsed inward. The hillside gave way. Rocks, soil, roots. All of it broke loose like floodwater bursting from a dam. The porch splintered into pieces, beams cracked, dust rose in great choking plumes. Lena screamed. Jake grabbed her arm and pulled her back, away from the edge. Atlas barked furiously, circling them, pushing them farther out of danger. Within seconds, the cabin, her new beginning, her safe place, was gone. Nothing left but broken earth and swirling dust. Silence followed, deeper than before, eerie, final. Lena fell to her knees, Noah still in her arms, both shaking. Her breath came in sharp gasps, eyes wide with horror. Jake knelt beside her, his voice low. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. Her gaze shifted to Atlas, now seated close by, still and alert. His chest heaved, but he made no sound. "No," she whispered. "He saved us." Jake's throat tightened. For the first time since Bear, that heaviness in his chest began to lift, just slightly. Atlas nudged his hand gently with his nose, the gesture simple but profound. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. But here, in the aftermath, there was only the quiet breath of a child, the trembling of a mother, the steadiness of a man, and the loyalty of a dog who had seen what no one else did, and acted before anyone else could. Morning struggled to break through the heavy grey clouds that hung low over Crescent Pines. The dust from the landslide still lingered, settled like ash on rooftops, pine needles and mailboxes. It clung to everything, the cars, the porches, even the air itself. The town, still reeling from what had happened the night before, wore the weight of silence. But inside the small brick building of both the sheriff's office and emergency shelter, warmth began to stir. Lena Carter sat curled on a worn leather bench, a thick woolen blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her arms cradled baby Noah, who now slept soundly against her chest, oblivious to the world's noise. His mouth hung slightly open in peaceful slumber, one tiny hand poking out from the blanket. Lena's face was pale, her eyes wide, glassy with exhaustion and disbelief. She rocked gently, instinctively, her mind still somewhere back at the base of the hill where her cabin had stood just hours earlier. Across the room, Officer Jake Morgan leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his uniform streaked with dirt and bits of pine. His boots were still wet from digging, his knuckles raw from moving rubble. He watched her silently, unsure of what to offer. Comfort, coffee, words. None of it felt quite right. So he offered nothing for now. Atlas lay beside the bench, his head resting between his front paws, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. He hadn't left Lena or Noah's side since they arrived. Not for water, not for rest. Every time Noah stirred, Atlas would lift his head, ears flicking, and inch closer until the baby calmed. There was something uncanny in his attentiveness, measured, maternal almost. Noah let out a soft whimper, and instantly Atlas moved, nudging the edge of the blanket with his nose and releasing a quiet huff. The baby settled. Lena watched, awe flickering behind her tired gaze. "Is he always like this?" she asked quietly, her voice hoarse. Jake looked up, caught off guard by her speaking. "Not with everyone," he said. "He's smart. Picks who needs him." Lena's lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but the thought faded before it formed. Her hand gently smoothed the baby's head as she looked back at Atlas. "I've never seen anything like it," she murmured. Before Jake could reply, the front door opened with a gust of cold wind. A woman stepped in, short in stature, bundled in an orange reflective jacket, clipboard tucked under her arm. Her boots thudded with purpose as she entered, her sharp brown eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. Lauren Kim, the lead field technician for the state's geological assessment team, didn't need introductions. She moved like someone who had walked through disaster zones before and wasn't fazed by much anymore. Her dark hair was tied into a neat ponytail and her tone was all business. "I just came from the site," she said, handing the clipboard to Jake. The slope gave way under the foundation. Slow erosion, likely from an underground spring, been weakening for months, maybe years. Jake flipped through the data, readings, images, contour reports. It wasn't anything a normal patrol could have caught. "Nothing visible from the outside," Lauren continued. "No fault lines, no cracks, just bad luck. She's lucky that dog pulled her out when he did." Lena swallowed. Her hands clenched the edge of the blanket tighter. "So, it wasn't something I did?" she asked softly. Lauren turned to her, her expression softening as she shook her head. "No, ma'am. That house was standing on borrowed time. Jake noticed the way Lena's shoulders sank at that, relief mixed with something heavier. Survivor's guilt, maybe. He filed it away mentally. She'd need more than just housing. She'd need time. After Lauren left, Jake made a quiet call. The town had a small emergency grant fund, rarely used but meant for situations like this. He began the process to secure Lena and Noah temporary shelter, meal assistance, and if possible a housing voucher. He didn't tell her. Not yet. She didn't need more questions. Atlas continued to stand guard. Every time someone walked by, he shifted position slightly, placing himself between them and Lena. Each time Noah whimpered, he moved closer, sometimes resting his chin on the edge of the carrier. There was no command for that. No training could teach a dog to love this way. He simply did. As the hours passed, Deputy Mara Jennings appeared in the break room, placing a box of supplies on the counter with a thud. In her early 50s, Mara was tall, solid, with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a loose braid and a reputation for blunt honesty. She gave a long look at Lena and then turned to Jake. "She okay?" she asked. "She will be," Jake said. "Just needs time." Mara grunted. "Well, radio's buzzing. Reporters already sniffing around. They want interviews. Think that dog's a miracle." Jake didn't look up. He hated how fast stories turned into headlines. He turned his gaze back to Lena, who had finally fallen asleep on the bench, Noah nestled against her chest, and Atlas lying beside them like a statue. "She's not ready for that," Jake said. "Didn't think so," Mara replied. "I'll keep them off her back." By nightfall, snow had returned, light and slow, like the sky trying to quietly cover what had been broken. Jake offered Lena a cot in the back office. She accepted it with a quiet nod, her gratitude too heavy for words. As she curled beneath the thin blanket, Atlas padded silently behind her and laid down at her side, a silent protector. Jake lingered in the office for a while longer, watching the snow drift down through the window. His hand rested gently on Atlas's head, fingers brushing the soft fur between his ears. For the first time in nearly a year, the hollow ache inside Jake eased. By the third morning, Crescent Pines was already buzzing. At the local cafe, a chalkboard sign read, "Coffee for Heroes, free for first responders and dogs." The townsfolk whispered over mugs of cocoa and stacks of pancakes, eyes wide with awe. They spoke of the landslide, yes, but more about the moment just before. About the dog who lunged and the woman who followed. About how seconds had saved lives. Across town, in a modest government-subsidized apartment complex tucked behind a row of young evergreens, Lena Carter stood at her small kitchen table. Her phone vibrated in her hand. The message on screen made her breath stop. "Nice new place, Lena. Cozy. Bet the baby cries at night. See you soon." Lena's vision blurred, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. She sank into a chair as the weight of the message crashed over her. Brent had found her, again, after everything, even here, even now. He had clawed his way back, and just like that, the peace shattered. By the time Jake arrived at the apartment, dusk was settling over Crescent Pines like a heavy curtain. The town's soft hush had returned, snowflakes dancing lightly in the air, and yet Lena's building felt different, quieter, tense. She hadn't answered his first knock, which wasn't like her. He tried again, knocking more firmly. "It's me," he said softly through the door. After a pause, the lock clicked and the door creaked open. Lena stood behind it, her hair damp, eyes rimmed with red. Her expression was hollow, like all colour had been drained from her face. Jake stepped inside cautiously. "What happened?" Wordlessly, she handed him her phone. He read the message and his jaw clenched. The silence that followed was thick with implication. "Did you tell anyone where you moved?" he asked. "No one," Lena whispered. "Not even my old co-workers. I changed everything, my number, my address, my name on some bills. I thought we were safe." Jake scanned the room as she spoke, noting the modest furniture, the borrowed crib, the stack of unopened mail. The baby's soft cooing drifted from the corner like a ghost in the background. "Did you notice anyone watching the place? Anything out of place?" he asked. Lena shook her head. "Nothing. I was finally starting to feel like it was over." Jake exhaled slowly, suppressing the fury burning beneath his calm demeanor. He reached for his radio and requested increased patrols around Lena's apartment. As the dispatcher confirmed, he walked to where Atlas was stationed near the front door. The German Shepherd was already alert, ears perked, posture stiff. Something about Lena's panic had ignited a silent tension in the dog. Jake knelt beside him, his voice low and deliberate. "Watch her. Don't leave this door." Atlas didn't blink, didn't move, but his eyes met Jake's and held steady. Across town, the evening rolled on, but peace felt fractured. Jake was called away briefly to Rosie's Corner Mart, a small convenience store run by Rosie Delgado, a no-nonsense woman in her late 60s who wielded her flashlight like a weapon. "Someone's been stealing from me," she said flatly. "Not cash, food, cans, granola bars, jerky. No sign of a break-in, just gone." Jake stepped inside, sweeping his flashlight across the narrow aisles. Atlas followed at his heels, sniffing along the corners, his nose low to the linoleum. "I've checked the cameras," Rosie said. "Nothing clear. It's always at night. I thought maybe raccoons, but raccoons don't take protein bars." Jake reviewed the grainy, flickering camera footage in the back. Not much. Shadows, vague shapes, barely any detail. Then, from the other end of the store, Atlas gave a sharp whine. Jake followed the sound to the back door, where faint footprints led away into the snow. Small, barely deep enough to be a child's. Jake squatted down, studying them. The tread was uneven, light. "Atlas," he said. "Track." The dog surged forward, nose to the ground, weaving through the back lot and into the wooded slope behind the store. The snow thinned as they went deeper, revealing patches of dirt and broken twigs. After 10 minutes, they came upon a small, forgotten hunting shed. Its door hung loose on rusted hinges, the wood weathered and cracked. Jake pushed it open carefully. Inside, dim light filtered through a broken window, revealing a tangled pile of blankets and food wrappers on the ground. And then, movement. In the corner, a figure stirred. A boy, maybe 13, curled up on the floor, his limbs tucked tightly under him. His clothes were too thin for the season, layered unevenly. His hair was matted, his cheeks hollow. He bolted upright, grabbing a stick like a makeshift weapon, his hands trembling. "Stay back," he shouted. Jake raised both hands calmly. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. My name's Jake. I'm a police officer. That's Atlas." Atlas stood just behind Jake, unmoving, watching the boy with calm, intelligent eyes. "You hungry?" Jake asked. The boy didn't respond right away. His eyes flicked between Jake and Atlas. Then, slowly, he nodded once. They brought him back to the cruiser, where he clutched a paper cup of hot cocoa from Rosie's, both hands wrapped tightly around it. The story came out in pieces, between sips and silences. His name was Eli Maddox. 13. Originally from Boulder, he'd bounced between foster homes for years, most of them neglectful or worse. He had run away in late winter after a final placement failed. Hitchhiking, hiding, stealing scraps. He'd made it to Crescent Pines because, as he put it, it seemed quiet. Jake listened without interruption, taking mental notes. He contacted the County Youth Services Center and arranged for Eli to be admitted safely. But before he dropped him off, they made one last stop at Rosie's. "You still got that cocoa machine?" Jake asked. Rosie squinted at him. "You gonna make that boy pay me back?" "Yeah," Jake replied with a faint smile. "Someday." As Eli drank from his cup, legs swinging in the back of the cruiser, he looked at Jake and asked, "You gonna keep me in some big home?" "For now," Jake said. "But you're not forgotten." That night, back at Lena's apartment, the air felt tight. Lena stayed up, sitting on the edge of her bed, eyes fixed on the shadows beneath the door. Noah lay asleep in his crib, his breath even and slow. But Lena couldn't relax, not with the text burned into her memory. On the floor, Atlas stretched across the threshold like a gate. His body was still, but his eyes moved constantly, scanning every flicker of light from the hallway. When Noah stirred in his sleep, letting out a soft cry, Atlas rose silently, poked his snout gently into the crib, and then returned to his post. Lena watched him, a tear sliding silently down her cheek. For the first time in years, something, was watching over her. Not for control, not out of fear, but with the purest form of loyalty. And for the first time she felt the edges of safety brushing against her skin again. But danger was still out there, watching, waiting. And it had a name. Night pressed against the windows like a held breath. Crescent Pines, known for its stillness after dark, felt unnaturally quiet. No hum of distant cars, no footsteps on the sidewalk. Just the faint rustling of pine branches in the wind. Inside her modest apartment on Millstone Lane, Lena Carter moved carefully through the dimly lit living room. She wore soft grey sweats, her hair braided loosely over one shoulder, and in her arms, Noah slept soundly, his little mouth parted in infant slumber. The nightly routine had become sacred: bath, lullaby, rocking chair, then the crib. Each movement filled with silent prayers that tonight would pass without fear, without memory. She leaned gently over the crib and laid Noah down. His eyelids fluttered but stayed closed. She exhaled slowly, brushing a hand across her forehead. The hallway behind her was empty. Atlas, usually stationed near the front door, wasn't there. She assumed Jake had taken him for their evening patrol. She turned toward the kitchen. Then, click, a subtle sound, metallic, muffled. She froze. Another click. Closer this time. Her breath caught in her throat, the back door. Her heart slammed into her ribs. She had locked that door, always locked it. Panic surged. She reached for her phone on the kitchen counter and fumbled to dial 911. Her fingers trembled, hit the wrong key. She cursed under her breath and tried again, the screen slipping sideways as her hands shook. A sharp creak echoed from the hallway. The doorknob turned. Then he was there. Brent Holloway stepped into the apartment like he had always belonged. Tall, broad-shouldered, a dark baseball cap shadowing his face. His hair was unkempt, his eyes wild, glassy with something darker than rage. He didn't shout, didn't lunge. That terrified Lena more than anything. "Didn't think I'd find you again," he said, voice low, almost friendly. "But you always leave little pieces behind." Lena took a step back, eyes darting to the crib. "Don't," Brent warned, lifting a hand. "I just want to talk." "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. "And yet here I am," he said with a cold smile. "You made me into this, Lena. You broke me when you left." Her back hit the kitchen wall. Her phone finally connected, 911 ringing, but Brent moved. Then a blur, silent and fast, raced across the yard outside. Atlas. He had sensed it earlier. A shift in Lena's voice, a tremor in her pulse. Even miles away in the back of the patrol SUV, he'd grown restless. The door latch had given way beneath his strength. He slipped free, paws pounding against pavement, his instincts drowning out everything else. He leapt 2 fences, raced through an alley and reached Lena's building in minutes. One look at the dark window told him everything. He jumped. Glass exploded as Atlas burst through the lower kitchen pane, shards flying into the room like tiny missiles. Brent turned, shocked, just as Atlas launched into him. The shepherd crashed into his midsection, knocking him backwards, sending them both skidding across the floor. Brent let out a cry of rage and pain, grappling with the dog. Atlas's teeth latched onto Brent's arm, not deep enough to maim, but enough to pin, to hold. His body braced like a drawn bow, every muscle ready to strike again. His growl was low, vibrating with warning. Lena screamed, shielding the crib with her body, knees buckling under the weight of fear and disbelief. Outside, sirens screamed into the silence. Red and blue lights flooded the street as Jake's cruiser screeched to a stop in front of the shattered apartment. He had been 2 miles away when the alert came in. Atlas's GPS had pinged off route. That had never happened before. Jake had called for backup mid-turn, tires skidding, panic rising. He knew. Before he even saw the broken window, he knew. He burst through the front door, weapon drawn, eyes sweeping the room. What he saw made him freeze for half a second. Brent Holloway pinned to the floor by Atlas, blood seeping from his arm. Lena crouched nearby, Noah in her arms, sobbing, shaking. Glass crunched under Jake's boots. "Don't move," Jake shouted, weapon trained on Brent. "Stay on the ground." Brent turned his head slowly. His mouth twitched into a grin. "She's mine," he said. "Not anymore," Jake growled. He cuffed Brent moments later, the man's wrists slick with sweat and blood. Backup arrived. Officer Danvers and Deputy Mara Jennings stormed in, weapons raised. Brent was dragged outside in restraints, still smiling like he had won something. Inside, Jake holstered his weapon and moved to the couch where Lena sat. Noah was clutched tightly against her chest, and her body trembled like a leaf in a storm. Atlas stood beside her, chest heaving, eyes still locked on the door. Glass sparkled on his fur. Jake knelt down. "He's gone," he said softly. "You're safe." Lena looked up at him, green eyes flooded with tears and disbelief. "He would have hurt us," she whispered. "He would have if Atlas hadn't." Jake turned to the dog. Atlas didn't move. He stood tall, the same alert posture, the same sharp eyes. His loyalty had no pause, no condition. The red and blue lights painted the apartment in flickering color. Across the room, the nursery door stood half open, casting a shadow shaped like Atlas's form across the crib. Lena wept quietly into Noah's blanket. Atlas pressed his side gently against her, his tail thumping once in quiet pride. 2 days later, the town of Crescent Pines buzzed louder than usual, not in noise, but in conversation. At grocery stores, post offices, and coffee counters, people spoke in hushed awe about what had happened, not just about the landslide, but about the dog who saved a life twice. The photo started it all. Mara Jennings had snapped it in the aftermath, Atlas standing between Lena and Noah, broken glass at his paws, eyes sharp, body firm. She hadn't meant to share it publicly, but someone did. And by sunrise, it was everywhere. K9 Hero Strikes Twice read the headline on the Sunday edition of the local Gazette. News vans arrived from Denver. Social media posts tagged Atlas as a guardian, a miracle, a symbol of unwavering loyalty. Memes circulated. Artists began sketching his likeness. A nearby shelter renamed their new rescue initiative after him. But inside Lena's apartment, there was no talk of headlines. There was only healing. And a dog who now stood by the crib, not because he was assigned to, but because he chose to. Lena didn't sleep much in the days following the arrest. The images replayed in her mind. Brent's voice low and dangerous, the sound of the glass shattering, Atlas crashing through the window like a bolt of judgment. And then Jake, appearing in the doorway like an answer to a prayer whispered too late. Yet even as the fear lingered, something deeper had begun to take root. Resolve. When the assistant district attorney, Maggie Thornahill, visited her apartment with a folder thick with reports, photos, and legal forms, Lena didn't hesitate. She sat straight, hands folded in her lap, and listened. Maggie, a woman in her early 40s with elegant braids and eyes that didn't miss much, had come not to pressure, but to empower. She laid the evidence out gently on the coffee table, her tone calm but unyielding. "You're the best chance we have of keeping him away for good," Maggie said. "He has a pattern. You know that, and now we have a moment to stop it. But we need your voice." Lena's fingers tightened, but her voice was steady. "Then I'll speak." Jake had already made his role clear. As a law enforcement officer and direct witness, his testimony would be critical. But he offered more than statements and legal support. He offered presence. He promised to be there for every court appearance, every meeting, every step forward. Not just as a cop, but as her advocate. On the morning of the pre-trial hearing, Jake arrived early in his patrol SUV. Noah was buckled in safely in the back, Atlas curled beside him, nose pressed against the window as though sensing the weight of the day. The drive was quiet. Lena sat in the front seat wearing a simple navy coat, her scarf tucked neatly beneath the collar. Her hair was pulled back, her face bare. She didn't try to hide her nerves, but she didn't let them own her either. Inside the courthouse, a modest brick building with too many fluorescent lights and walls that echoed footsteps too loudly, Lena waited on a wooden bench outside courtroom B. Atlas lay at her feet, his ears relaxed but alert, eyes flicking toward every passing figure. A few people glanced, recognizing the dog from the headlines. Some whispered, some smiled. Lena didn't flinch. Jake sat beside her, his presence calm, steady. "You don't have to do more than you're ready for," he said quietly. Lena looked down at Noah, asleep in her arms, then back at the courtroom door. "No one else gets to tell this story but me." And so, when her name was called, Lena stood, handed Noah gently to a courthouse advocate, and stepped into the room with Atlas and Jake beside her. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, life in Crescent Pines was shifting in quiet ways. At the community park, now bright with blooming dogwoods, Eli Maddox sat cross-legged at a picnic table, a pencil in his hand and a sketchpad open on his lap. His shaggy hair fell into his eyes as he worked, tongue poking out slightly in concentration. Across from him sat Lena, Noah in his stroller nearby. They'd met by chance. A quick hello turned into a conversation, then a shared moment of stillness in a park full of motion. "You draw all that yourself?" Lena asked, watching him shade the ear of a familiar figure. Eli nodded, bashful. "I draw stuff I see, stuff I want to remember." "Can I see?" He turned the page. It was Atlas, drawn with charcoal pencil, head low, stance ready, eyes intense. The drawing was rough but electric, alive. That's really good," Lena said, genuinely impressed. Eli shrugged. "He's easy to draw. He looks like he knows stuff." "He does," she smiled. Over the following days, Lena encouraged him to draw more, different poses, different scenes. Atlas beside a baby crib, Atlas standing beneath the willow tree in the park, Atlas bursting through a shattered window. A small collection of illustrations began to form. Maggie Thornhill took one look at them and knew what to do. She shared them with the courthouse victim advocacy team, and from there the drawings were posted on the county's official website under the title A Child's Eye on Bravery. They went viral. Local news picked up the story. A shelter in Denver renamed their pet foster program the Atlas Initiative. Teachers at Crescent Pines Elementary printed Eli's drawings as colouring sheets for a classroom lesson on courage. But for Lena, the true moment of victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the courtroom. When the charges against Brent were formally read, violation of a protective order, criminal trespassing, attempted assault with intent to harm, Lena stood at the witness stand, her back straight, voice clear. She recounted every moment, the text, the knock, the sound of the doorknob turning, Atlas's explosion through the glass. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Jake sat nearby in full uniform, and Atlas lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving her. When she finished, the judge, an older man named Harold Nielsen, known for his fairness and quiet authority, cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Carter," he said. "That took courage." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, just enough to soften the edges of the world. Lena stood on the courthouse steps, Noah in her arms, Atlas sitting beside them. Jake stood close, his coat buttoned high against the wind. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. Jake looked out over the street, his eyes calm. "I think the worst part is." She exhaled, and for the first time in months, the breath didn't fog with fear. In the days that followed, Crescent Pines seemed to thaw, slowly and carefully. Sidewalks reappeared beneath melting snow. Children returned to the playgrounds. Laughter rose faintly from backyards again. Lena woke each morning to something she hadn't felt in a long time, normalcy. She began working part-time at the town library, a quiet brick building tucked between the post office and a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and warm honey. The job had been offered by Helen McKee, the head librarian, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and an encyclopedic memory for book titles and birthdays. "You've already proven you're brave," Helen had said simply when Lena came in for the interview. "Let's get you shelved in something quiet." So Lena spent her mornings shelving children's books, helping elderly patrons find large print mysteries and reading stories under the stained glass sun in the children's nook. Jake began dropping by more often, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with an excuse about routine patrols. But he never left without asking how she was sleeping. He never asked if she was scared. He didn't need to. And on Saturdays, Atlas became a library fixture, invited to lie in the children's section during story hour. The kids adored him. He'd sprawl on the rug as toddlers read picture books aloud, one little girl even placing a paper crown on his head. He didn't flinch. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled in the distance and the library lights flickered gently, Lena sat on the floor watching Noah crawl slow, excited circles near Atlas's tail. Jake sat across from her, laughing at a child's tale about a dragon hiding beneath the book return slot. "You know," she said quietly, "if it hadn't been for you and Atlas, I don't think we'd be here." Jake tilted his head. "Here in the library?" "No," she replied, eyes warm. "Here, safe, healing." Jake looked down and smiled. "We just did what needed doing." But Lena shook her head. "You chose to care. That's not nothing." Atlas padded over and rested his head gently on her shoulder. She laughed and scratched behind his ears. "He always knows, doesn't he?" she said. Jake nodded. "Better than most people I've known." The final gavel strike echoed through the quiet courtroom like the last note of a long, somber song. No fanfare, no applause. Just the murmur of closing statements and the soft shuffle of chairs. Brent Holloway had been sentenced to 5 years in prison, 3 without the possibility of parole, for violating the restraining order and attempting to harm Lena Carter and her child. He didn't look back as the bailiff led him away in chains. His jaw was locked, his eyes empty. But Lena didn't need to see his face to feel the shift inside her. Something had ended. Not the memory, not the fear entirely, but the hold. The power he once had over her was gone. She sat in the wooden bench, her fingers interlaced tightly in her lap, her breath slow and steady. She didn't cry. She didn't smile, she simply breathed. That was enough. Beside her, Jake Morgan stood tall in his formal Navy uniform, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Atlas lay at their feet, calm and alert, his head between his paws, his eyes soft but watching. Outside, Crescent Pines waited under a blanket of quiet grey. The scent of pine and winter frost lingered in the air. Snow had returned, not in chaos but with grace. This time Lena felt no panic in its coming. She felt stillness. 1 week after the verdict, Lena signed a lease on a narrow storefront at the corner of Main Street, a place with creaky floors, peeling green paint, and wide front windows that caught the morning light just right. It had once been a florist's shop, abandoned now but still holding the scent of soil and possibility. With the help of Jake, Atlas, and a few volunteers from the town, she cleaned and painted and polished. The shelves were restocked with second-hand books, handmade candles, and locally crafted pottery. A faint melody played from a record player near the counter, soft and warm. She named it Fern and Hearth. In the back, she set up a small space, a cosy nook with a plush rug, children's books, and soft floor pillows, where Noah could play while she worked. He toddled across the room now, steady on his feet, his first steps witnessed not in solitude but surrounded by laughter and quiet cheer. He had taken them in the shop's main room, walking from Atlas's steady side to the leg of a wooden chair, while a librarian, 2 customers, and a plumber named Rick all clapped like they'd seen magic. He walked right into the dog, Rick had said later, and both of them survived it. That's a good omen. Atlas, of course, had barely blinked. The town came. Grandmothers looking for quilting patterns, teenagers flipping through vintage poetry, tourists who had heard about the woman with the brave dog. But no one gawked. They came in slowly, respectfully. They bought a candle. They returned the next week. They stayed. Jake visited often, sometimes in uniform, more often not. He wore jeans now, rolled sleeves, and a smile that didn't have to fight to be seen. He had turned down the Denver offer quietly, sent the signed rejection letter back without a second thought. When asked why, he simply said, "This is where I'm needed." His role in the department shifted. Less patrol, more community. He started mentoring local teens, organizing safety programs, helping build trust where there had once been silence. He had always been a protector. Now he was something more. Present. Atlas adjusted to his retirement with his own quiet grace. He still patrolled Lena's apartment at night, still growled low when unfamiliar footsteps passed by the window, but in the shop he became a fixture. He slept in the sunny front corner on a round dog bed Lena stitched herself. He let toddlers clamber over him, allowed old men to stroke his ears while they argued about historical biographies. He was no longer a K-9 officer. He was a guardian by choice. Noah adored him. Every morning began with small arms thrown around the dog's neck, giggles and babbles as Atlas grumbled softly but never moved. The bond between them remained something unspoken and sacred. As the year drew to a close, Crescent Pines prepared for its annual winter festival, a tradition that filled the town square with hand-carved ice sculptures, a lantern parade, and more hot cocoa than anyone could reasonably drink. This year, the mayor, a petite woman named Cynthia Mallory, known for her blunt speeches and practical boots, introduced a new ceremony. Under an arch of pine and snow-dusted lanterns, in front of the glowing crowd, Mayor Mallory stepped forward with a polished maple plaque in her hands. Her voice rose above the wind, firm and clear. For courage in the face of danger, she said, for loyalty that never wavered, for protecting the hearts of this town, we name Atlas the guardian of Crescent Pines. The crowd erupted. Children clapped with mittened hands. Elderly couples wiped their eyes. Jake gave Atlas a firm pat on the neck and leaned close to whisper something only the dog could hear. Lena stood beside them, Noah bundled in her arms, wide-eyed at the falling snow. They didn't pose for a picture. There was no grand declaration. They simply stood, 3 souls and a dog, together. Later that night, after the cider and carols, after the crowds dispersed and the lights dimmed, the town square lay quiet once again. Snow spiraled gently beneath the street lamps. Lena, Jake, and Atlas lingered a moment longer. Noah slept, his small head nestled against his mother's shoulder. Jake stood close, his arm warm around her back. Atlas sat between them, tail brushing lightly against the snow. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. They had survived collapse, of land, of faith, of safety. But now in the hush of snowfall and streetlight glow, they stood not as victims, but as something more. They had peace. And peace, Lena had learned, was enough. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come with 4 paws, steady eyes, and a heart that refuses to quit. In a world filled with uncertainty, Atlas had reminded them, and everyone watching, that love wasn't always loud, protection wasn't always visible, and that family wasn't always made by blood. It was made by choice, by sacrifice, by courage. This wasn't just the story of a woman, a child, and a dog. It was a story about timing, grace, and quiet faith. That somehow, the right souls find each other exactly when they're needed most. And as snow fell gently around them, that truth wrapped itself around the 4 of them like a blanket. Not loud, not showy, but warm and unbreakable.